conversion stuff, no old stuff. They just put it in, and it costs just under $5 million a kilometer to put in a trolley bus system, two ways. No, and sorry, they cost even less, but they've worked on 8.5-minute headways on their system, and I thought we should triple that. In other words, cut them in a third to come up to the capacity of an LRT system. Okay, so I've tripled the amount of allowance for vehicles there. And it still is under $5 a kilometer. That is the vehicles and the poles and the wires and the substations and everything else. Okay? So that's the magic ingredient. That's how I managed to do the next trick. And the next trick is that instead of the stuff on the left, which is what the current plan is, I do everything that is proposed for Transit City by 2020. And these are the ingredients. First of all, the Shepherd LRT, instead of just the first phase, I do both phases. So the cost actually goes up a bit there. And I'm just using their numbers. The only difference between my numbers and their numbers is that their numbers are all over the place in terms of years. And I have assiduously gone through and converted it all to $210, so that we don't have apples and oranges, we have apples and apples and apples all the way. The Eglinton LRT was the tunnel part. I say, put a subway in there. Put a subway for that 10 kilometers and run trolley buses at each end. The whole thing is 33, so you've got 9 at one end and 30, whatever it is. And the subway is actually cheaper because use the price of the Spadina subway extension, which is a tunnel extension. And so instead of 3.6 billion, it's 3 billion. And then the trolleys cover the remaining 23 kilometers of the. So there are two trolley routes then, one at each end of the subway. The Scarborough LRT is replaced by a trolley bus. The Finch LRT is replaced by a trolley bus. But it is also, the whole of it is now built, not just the part between Humber College and Finch West Station, but the part between Humber College and Finch Station on the Young Line, and also another bit to Don Mills, which they're not even contemplating because we need to have one linkage between the west of the system and the east of the system, which they haven't provided for. Which, if there is an operational problem, half the buses for some reason in the west go out, you can move some buses. They don't have any way of moving buses from the west to the east. And I thought you needed that. So I added that link to Don Mills. I'll come back to this on the map in a minute. Shepherd subway extension, I want to come back to that. It's a new subway I'm proposing. Jane trolley, obvious. Don Mills trolley, obvious. Now, I kept the Malvern LRT. Why did I do that? Well, we got all these damn streetcars we've ordered. We got to use them for something, okay? And it seemed to me that the Malvern was the one that actually made the most sense in terms of value for money, what you would get for, and I used the Finch per kilometer cost for that. And then the West Waterfront is not very well planned, and I had 376 million left over. And I don't know if it's going to cost 376, more or less, because it's hard to attach a price to it, but I threw that in with the West Waterfront so that my numbers matched at the end. Okay? So let's go back to the map. Sorry. And what I'm proposing is essentially building all of that stuff that they're proposing, plus that little bit more of Finch from there. They're only going to Finch West, to Finch Station. I'm saying build that bit as well. Actually, they do have a link between East and West, sorry, and that is through the tunnel. But that's not very satisfactory. So I'm adding that bit there. But the other thing that I'm doing is saying we should make better use of that Shepherd subway line. Now, Mr. Ford wants to extend it east, but I think the sensible thing to do is to extend it west. And I'll come to a further reason for doing that in a minute. So I'm proposing, it already extends for half a kilometre along there because they built a stub. I'm saying put another it's about 5 kilometres, put another 4.5 kilometres and take it to Downsview Station. And then you have a lot of opportunity for rerouting trains up there, and it just becomes a more satisfactory thing. And I will show you in a minute, it comes coupled with a lot of development opportunities. So my plan builds the whole thing. So the only thing that's unchanged is Shepherd East LRT Phase 1. Okay, that just stays the same, completely unchanged. I'm deleting the Eglinton LRT, the Finch LRT, the Scarborough LRT. That's 40 kilometres of LRT. But I'm adding in 27 kilometres of LRT and 14 kilometres of subway. So I'm finishing up actually with more LRT or subway than they are proposing to build. And I'm adding 83 kilometres of trolleybus on its own right of way. And I think this is a hugely better plan. And you should all be calling about it. The only thing that's not included in here, because it hasn't been worked out, is that in the original plan there are one of the storage and maintenance yards for the LRT is funded and two of them are not. And you do need specialized storage and maintenance yards for LRT, but you don't need them for trolleybuses. For trolleybuses, regular bus yards will work. You just have to put up a few poles, a few wires. But the work has not been done on what it would cost. I reckon off the top of my head that you could provide for the whole acquired trolleybus fleet for less than about $10 million. But I really don't know that. I haven't. The TDC has a large number of bus yards, and I just don't know which ones would be appropriate and how you would work that out. But I don't see it as being a serious problem. It's not a $100 million cost like the streetcar maintenance yard. It's down in the low number of millions. So what are the issues in doing this? The first is that there are too many LRTs on order for vehicles for what I'm proposing. Well, Bombardier builds subway trains as well. They're actually the main subway train builder in the world. So I'm sure they could be persuaded to exchange some of their LRT vehicles for subway trains. I don't see that as being an issue. The tunnelling machines have already been ordered for Eglinton. Fortunately, they have been, even though they are for streetcars, the tunnels were planned for subway specifications. So it's the same tunnels. They will work for subways. Trolleybuses take up roadway. Well, I've already mentioned this. They do, especially if they're on their own right of way, but they take up less than LRT, so that's not an issue. This is what I want to come to. In order to justify a subway, parts of Eglinton and Shepherd must be massively redeveloped. That's the next part of my talk. Some redevelopment should go on anyway, and that's a huge issue, but even more with this, and that's a bigger issue. The last one I highlight here is the provincial government wouldn't agree to a change in plan. I think the provincial government would agree to anything the city wants as long as it doesn't cost more, seems cost effective, and doesn't result in delay that can be attributed to the province. The capital costs are large in all of these things, and it's always interesting to relate it on a per ride basis, which people don't do. And if you do that for the Eglinton line as presently planned, the 10 kilometres of tunnel and the 9 kilometres of LRT, surface LRT, it comes out to be about $4.25 per ride, the cost of that. And that's taking their generous estimate of what the ridership is going to be. If you put in a subway there, and you have appropriate development near the stations, which is the point I'm just going to come to, that could come down to about $1 a ride. It's always interesting in these things to figure out what the estimated per ride cost of all this expenditure is. So, development, yes.
Given that you have a price there of $4.25 per ride plus $2 per operating cost,
right?
$6.25.
Yeah.
They're just
ballpark. Both numbers are ballpark.
Yeah. So that, I mean, they're not going to charge people $6.25.
No. So it's a loss, constant loss.
Right. Constant loss. Is it subsidized by the rest of the system, or is it subsidized from outside the system?
Well, the capital is not. The capital is just given to the system. So the capital is a prior subsidy. And they stopped thinking about that. I mean, it's ridiculous. No business would ever think, we're going to buy some new machinery, and then we're going to forget about that cost. You know, they have to pay for that new machinery out of their increased earnings from using the new machinery. I'm just going to come to that very point. Somebody else had a point?
I don't know if this is a good time to bring up concern I have is that with the Waterfront West LRT, there's nothing going east.
Yeah.
Kingston Road is the worst place of all to try and get anywhere.
Yeah.
And I just don't get it.
Yeah, one thing I didn't want to get into, but I think you have a very, very good point. I just wanted to stay within the general outline of their plan. I think the plan is deficient in other ways as well, in the way that you mentioned. But what I didn't want to do is to get in arguing about routes. I said, okay, let us presume that somebody has worked out that these are the best places to put the additions to the system. It's probably the case that they haven't, but I didn't want to get into that argument just now. Okay. And I mean, somebody else is welcome to do that, and I think you may have a point. If you look at the map, you can see it straight away. So, yes, sir.
You're going to have problems selling this because Rob Ford doesn't use logic when he applies his practices. He prefers a subway along Shepherd.
Yeah.
But the reality is the money has been allocated by the province for Transit City specifically because there is a Pan Am game coming up, so they need to go to the Aquatic Center in Scarborough.
That's all covered. I mean, my plan gets stuff built earlier than even, so it's not an issue on timing.
Yeah, but given that it's got to be phased in over time, it's not going to happen with Ford given.
Well, maybe we could get into this later. I mean, the mayor does not have a great deal of influence over these things unless the council lets the mayor have a lot of influence over these things.
And that's going to be a major part of our Q&A.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Can we come back to that, because I think Jeff's right. It should be a major part. I just want to go back to the technicalities, so to speak, of it, rather than the politics of the moment, and just stress that in order to make medium and high intensity transit work, you need passengers, you need customers, you need clients. And these come chiefly, although not only, from people who live and work along the routes that are being provided. In some cases they are shipped in by other routes, but mostly they come at least in well-run systems from along the routes. But it's one of the problems we have in Toronto is that most of our subway stations do not have development around them. We have about, I forget the numbers, about 60 or 65 heavy rail stations outside the downtown. And we've got about a dozen that have any development that is appropriate for heavy rail. And you can work through. I mean, you can just go on the Bloor Line West. I mean, just for example, at Spadina there's nothing. Bathurst, there's nothing. Christie, there's nothing. Ossington, there's nothing. Dufferin, there's nothing. Lansdowne, there's a little bit. Dundas West, there's a little. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. And that line was built in the 60s. And if you go north on the current Spadina line, it's even worse. I'll come to that in a minute. It's even worse. In fact, on the Spadina line, they're still short-turning most